You just had a good dinner. Maybe grilled chicken, a salad, some vegetables. Nothing that would embarrass you if a doctor saw your plate. And then, an hour later, sitting in front of the television, something pulls at you. Not hunger exactly, a very specific, very insistent want for something sweet. A cookie, a square of chocolate, anything. If you've caught yourself standing at the kitchen counter at 9 o'clock at night, telling yourself you'll just have a little, even though dinner was fine, even though you weren't hungry 20 minutes ago, stay with me. And if this isn't a once-in-a-while thing for you, if it happens most nights, almost on a schedule, stay with me even more closely. Because what's happening in your body right now has very little to do with willpower, and almost everything to do with a pattern most people never get explained to them. I'm Dr. Grant Ellery. I spend my time helping adults over 60 understand the changes happening inside their bodies as they age, particularly the ones tied to blood sugar, energy, and appetite. Not the changes you read about in a headline. The ones that show up quietly, at 9 o'clock at night, in your own kitchen, long after everyone has decided you should already have this figured out. Before we go further, I want to ask you something, because it helps me understand who's actually watching these videos. How old are you, and where are you watching from tonight? Leave your age and your city or country in the comments. And if you've noticed this exact pattern, a craving that shows up after dinner, not before it, tell me what time it usually hits. I read these because they help me shape what I cover next. Now here's what most people assume is happening. They think an after-dinner sugar craving means they lack discipline, or that they simply have a sweet tooth they've never outgrown, or that they secretly didn't eat enough at dinner, so their body is just asking for more calories. Some people even assume it means their blood sugar is already badly out of control, and the craving itself is a warning sign of disease. But in adults over 60, the real explanation is usually simpler and less alarming than any of that. The craving is often not about hunger at all. It's about a chemical dip, a specific, predictable drop that happens after a meal, especially an evening meal, and especially as insulin sensitivity shifts with age. One pattern I hear constantly from people in this age group: I eat a healthy dinner, I'm not even hungry, and I still end up wanting dessert like clockwork, almost every night. That's not a discipline problem. That's a body doing something very specific, on a very specific schedule, whether you fight it or not. Margaret is 64. Before she retired 2 years ago, dinner was whatever she could manage between work and everything else, and she never thought twice about an evening chocolate. Once she retired, she finally had time to cook the way she'd always meant to. Real vegetables, lean protein, nothing from a box. She was proud of that. So when the sugar cravings didn't go away, they actually confused her more than they ever had before. They didn't show up at lunch, when she was busiest and least careful. They showed up at night, an hour or so after a meal she'd actually planned well, sitting quietly in her own living room with nothing to blame. She started to wonder if something was wrong with her. Was this early diabetes? Had all those years of casual eating finally caught up with her, right when she'd started doing everything right? She began quietly dreading her evenings, waiting for the pull to arrive. What Margaret eventually learned, and what took her some real tracking to see, is that her craving wasn't contradicting her healthy dinner. It was being caused by the shape of it. Not the quality of the food, but the timing, the composition, and what her hormones were doing in the hours afterward. There's no miracle ending to Margaret's story. She still gets the occasional pull toward something sweet at night. What changed is that she understands why it happens, and that understanding changed her relationship with it completely. So let's talk about what's actually happening. What you experience is simple. An hour or two after dinner, a craving for something sweet. What's happening underneath is more layered. Start with the meal itself. Even a healthy dinner raises blood sugar. That's normal. That's expected. Your pancreas responds by releasing insulin to move that sugar out of your blood and into your cells. In a lot of adults over 60, that response is less precise than it used to be. The rise can be a little higher, and it can come back down a little faster than it would have at 35. That fast come down is where the craving often begins. Your body reads a fast-dropping number as, "We need fuel, now," even though on the whole you've eaten plenty. Think of it like a thermostat that used to hold a room at a steady 70 degrees. With age, that thermostat gets a little less precise. It overshoots, then it overcorrects. You don't feel the room getting cold gradually, you feel a sudden chill and reach for a blanket. That reach for a blanket moment, for your blood sugar, is a craving for something sweet. But here's the part most people miss, and it's the part I find most people over 60 have never once had explained to them. The time of day matters just as much as the food does. In the evening, your body is supposed to be turning down the volume on stress hormones like cortisol and turning up a hormone called leptin, which tells your brain, you've had enough, you can stop looking for food. When dinner runs late, when the evening is stressful, or when sleep has been poor for a stretch of nights, that handoff doesn't happen cleanly. Cortisol stays a little more elevated than it should. Leptin's signal gets a little quieter, and a hormone called ghrelin, the one that drives hunger, gets a little louder, earlier than it's supposed to. So you get two systems pulling in the same direction at exactly the same time. A blood sugar dip that says, get quick fuel, and an evening hormone shift that says, you're not as full as you think you are. Sugar is the fastest way to answer both signals at once. That's not a lack of discipline. That's two separate biological systems agreeing with each other. At the worst possible moment, right when you're trying to wind down. And here's where it gets genuinely interesting. Your brain remembers this. Every single time a sweet food resolves that dip and signal combination, your brain's reward system quietly logs it as a solution that works. With a feel-good chemical called dopamine rises, you feel better within minutes, and the pathway gets a little more established. This is why the craving can start to arrive almost on a schedule. At the same time, night after night. Your body isn't just reacting to tonight's dinner. It's replaying a pattern it has learned works. The same way you'd reach for a light switch in a dark room without thinking about it. This is also why the craving rarely responds to logic. Telling yourself, I already ate enough, doesn't quiet a system that isn't actually asking about calories. It's asking about a chemical dip and a learned pathway. Two things a stern lecture to yourself has very little power over. There's one more piece worth mentioning, because it explains why this pattern often gets sharper in your 60s specifically, rather than staying constant your whole life. The hormones that normally help buffer these evening swings, the ones involved in things like menopause and andropause, tend to decline in this decade. With less of that buffering in place, the same dinner that barely registered at 45 can produce a more noticeable dip and a louder craving at 65. It isn't a malfunction. It's simply one more system quietly shifting alongside the others. None of this means something is wrong with you. It means three ordinary systems, blood sugar regulation, evening hormone timing, and reward learning, are interacting in a way that becomes more noticeable after 60, because the first of those systems has simply gotten less precise with age. That's not a diagnosis. It's biology doing what biology does, later in life than you expected it to start. If you want to understand your own pattern, there are three things worth paying attention to. The first is what was actually in your dinner. A meal that's mostly refined carbohydrate, white rice, bread, pasta, with very little protein or fiber, tends to produce a sharper rise and a sharper fall in blood sugar, which usually means a stronger craving later. A meal built around protein, fiber, and some healthy fat produces a flatter, steadier curve, which usually means a quieter evening. The second is timing, specifically, how close dinner is to bedtime. Eating very close to when you go to sleep gives your body less time to complete that handoff from digesting mode to resting mode before you're lying down for the night, which is often when the craving shows up hardest and hangs around longest. The third is sleep quality from the night before. This is the one people skip over entirely, because it feels unrelated. A single night of poor sleep changes ghrelin and leptin the very next evening, before you've even noticed you're tired. So a craving that seems to come out of nowhere on a Tuesday is sometimes explained not by Tuesday's dinner at all, but by how you slept on Monday night. This isn't a hack, and it isn't a rule to follow perfectly. It's a framework. 3 things I want you to simply observe, for about a week, before you try to change anything at all. First, what your dinner was actually made of. Not calories, composition. Was there real protein and fiber on the plate, Or was it mostly starch? Second, what time you ate, and how long before you went to bed that night. Third, when the craving showed up, and how strong it was. On a scale of barely noticeable to, I have to have something right now. Something as simple as this works fine. Tuesday, pasta and bread, ate at 7:45, in bed by 9:30. Craving hit at 8:50, strong. Write it down for a week, even something as simple as 3 columns on a notepad by the stove. Most people who do this can see their own pattern within a few days. Usually a specific combination of a lighter, carb-heavy dinner and a later bedtime that lines up almost exactly with their strongest cravings. Once you can see the pattern laid out in your own handwriting, you're no longer fighting a mystery. You're working with information, and information is something you can actually act on. If you've noticed this same pattern, a craving that hits an hour or two after dinner, even after a meal you were proud of, tell me about it in the comments. What does your dinner usually look like on the nights it happens, and roughly what time does the craving show up? Your answer might help someone else watching this tonight realize they're not imagining it either. A quick note before we close. This video is for educational purposes only, and isn't a substitute for medical advice. Frequent or intense sugar cravings can occasionally point to blood sugar regulation issues that are worth discussing with your doctor, especially alongside symptoms like excessive thirst, fatigue, or unexplained weight changes. Always talk to your physician about anything specific to your own health. Margaret still keeps a small notebook by the stove. Not to track every bite, just the 3 things. What was on the plate, what time she ate, and how strong the pull was afterward. She told me once that the biggest change wasn't that the cravings disappeared. It's that she stopped feeling ambushed by them, night after night, in her own kitchen. That's really the goal here. Not a diet, not a rule you'll break by next Tuesday, just a clearer picture of what your own body is doing, so a 9 o'clock craving stops feeling like a mystery and starts feeling like something you understand. Not perfection, clarity.